Thank you for agreeing to give an interview on PWA. I would like to begin by asking how and when did progressive writers movement start? Because the movement gave birth to the association.
Right. I think the story is rather long in the sense that we'll have to go back to the 30s, 1930s, which is a very consequential time in the history of the world, so to say, entirely. If you look at the very beginnings, the Wall Street crash, 1929, also called the Black Tuesday. And if you take the journey on from there, you will find that several things were happening all over the world, especially in two domains, that is economy and politics. After the Wall Street crash, and then you have the Great Depression that follows, and it makes its impact everywhere. Uh, Economic recession, kind of significant changes taking place in society, culture, politics, economy, all over the world. You would find that this is also the time of great strives, of catastrophes, of I would say, wars and skirmishes between nations. Say, for example, you have the case of Germany, then you have Italy, China, Japan, Ethiopia, Spain, and finally the Second World War. So almost all the nations were very, very clearly involved in what was happening. Either they were the causes, and they were also bearing the brunt of that was happening all around. As a result of which, both the economic and the political climate, so to say, was totally disrupted and disturbed. It made its impact in another way because you also have, this is also the time of colonization and also the time when colonization started. So decolonization also was taking place. So if you look at this entire 30s, on the one hand the economic condition, then the political condition and colonization, and also the efforts at decolonization. As a result of which, the response that we have in the domains of art and culture, and more importantly, in the domain of literature. Very interesting thing is this, that it doesn't happen at one place. For example, if you look at the literatures being produced elsewhere, you will find that the echoes of 1930 come in very strange ways. Like, for example, the early poetry of W.H. Auden in England that was happening in America. A text like The Grapes of Wrath, wrote by John Steinbeck, or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. But ours is a different story. And we in, say, for example, 1930s when everything was happening, some of our Indians, young Indians at that point of time who were in England, were watching at what was happening all over the world. And they were studying in England at that point of time, and they wanted to get back to their country and look at their own context and see how things would be better. So what happened at that point of time is this, that not only India but elsewhere things were taking going for a change, say in the domains of art, literature, culture, and society, etc. Say you have simultaneously other things happening, like for example the Russian authors meet. Then you have in Paris a great conference, the World Conference of the Writers. Just as it happened during the Romantic movement in England, when France was, that French Revolution was taking place, early Romantics in England sitting and real time, say, from across the English Channel, whatever was happening, so it was being very closely watched by Wordsworth and Coleridge. There is a parallel, there is an analogy. So these Indian students, like for example, Gulraj Anand, Sajjad Zahir, Ahmad Ali, these were the persons, several persons who came together, thought that, of course, we need a different kind of literature in the social dynamics have changed, the economic and the political dynamics, cultural dynamics have changed. So they come back to India after having thought of what's happening and what was happening in France and what was happening in Russia as far as literature is concerned. So that is the time when you look at the Indian context, and that is the time when the progressive writers movement takes shape, and after that the association takes its birth, then the manifesto is created. So the Indian chapter or the Indian story of the progressive writer movements from then onwards, the mid-30s, you would say, probably speaking. And it takes place, as you know, in quote language is more important. I understand it takes place in Urdu more important than others, but you have great progressive writers and literature being written in Hindi and in Bangla and in Malayalam at the same time. So that is the initial story. After that, the Indian temple starts its growth in a very significant way.
So now that, what do we exactly mean by progressive literature? What is progressive in case of literature?
I would say that I would respond to this question in two ways. One is that it's it's contextualized. You have to look at this word progressive in a context. The context which I have just narrated, social, economic, political, cultural, etc. You have to look beyond. You have to negate. You have to get out of the mentality or the kind of a sensibility that created or that gave birth to a certain kind of romantic literature. For example, in India, the kind of literature that was being written was supposed to be retrograde, so we have to progress go beyond that. Considering especially the times in which we were living, and the times were different, therefore progressive. But as Premchand said, all literatures are progressive. You don't have to write, you can't write of things because after all, literature must have its contemporary relevance. So it has to progress. And Premchand, when he said, and others when they echoed the same views, they were responding to their times and also to the call of literature. Broadly speaking, that literature can't be retrograde. It must look at the times in which and must see the context in which it is being written. And from that point of view, it's progressive. So, first thing is that it has to be contextualized. It has to be seen in the location, in the time, the place, and also broadly speaking, what progressive means as such, which means that it was a step towards modernism. And I would say that in Urdu, for example, or in Hindi, Bangla, and Malayalam, this is a very significant movement in the sense that it opened ways for modernism to come in. So, from this point of view, progressive writers movement and the work of this association is very significant. This is a kind of a bridge, I would say. So, it is a bridge between the old and the new that was to come. There may be some people, and there are people, I understand, some critics who say that the progressive writers were propagandists, basically. Maybe they are right to a certain extent, but they are very significant. I do not know of any literary movement world over where history and politics and culture and society have been so immensely, the literature gets out of, is born out of this political and the economic turmoil. So from this point of view, I would say that progressive writers made a very significant step towards modernism.
So, taking a cue from your statement, can we say that modernism in India enters in literature through the movement of PW? If we say something modern, the period, if we look at,
yes.
I know Indian literature can't be periodized, but if we still look at, try to periodize it,
right.
So do we think that this is the modern era for Indian literature?
Yes, as far as Urdu is concerned, and I understand similar is the case with other literatures, as I said, this is the bridge. If you look at the history, the development of Urdu literature, more especially poetry, you would see at the turn of the century, two persons who come on the front, very significant voices, Altaf Hussain Wali and Muhammad Hussain Azad. They gave the call for the new poem to be written because they thought that whatever was being written so far or had been written so far didn't respond to the times. It was very romantic, very magical. It didn't really portray the realities of the world. The world was changing very fast. Colonization was there, and we had to decolonize. Lots of things were there. So they said that poetry, especially poetry, they said has to be the new start. They also said that Urdu poetry must get out of create new conditions, the new vocabulary, the new diction, the new imagery, the new themes, so entire say the conditions that they were trying to prescribe. So they gave a call and they succeeded partially, but also it took time for modernism to arrive. So that is the beginning at the turn of the century. But when the progressive come on the scene, two very important things happen as far as books are concerned. One is a book by Akhtar Hussain Raipuri, Adab or Inqilab, Literature and Revolution. A Marxist text, very important text, and that made way, created a condition for. Another book is Roshnai, which is group of select writings on progressive writers and their writings. So these two books created a condition. They defined the times fresh, and they wanted that literature must and should be written according to this. Of course, there were also some poets are writing at that point of time who didn't completely subscribe to this, but most of them. So it was a big movement that had made its place. So what I'm trying to say is this, that they were trying to find their voice, evolve a new idiom, a completely new poetics, so to say, which was far, far away from the poetics that was being followed earlier by poets at the time when Hali was writing and when Muhammad Hussain Azad was writing. So till Iqbal, you can say what was happening is like this. So progressive were window to modernists. And during the same time, there was another group of writers who were writing, poets especially. If you would go for an English translation, that will be Circle of Connoisseurs, or do we call it So you have poets like Miraji there, not a progressive one. Like, say, for example, a poet like Nur bin Rashid and M. Rashid. So he's not a progressive writer. They are modernists of a very different kind, more like Eliot and more like Pound. So at the same time, this was happening also, which means they didn't subscribe so clearly to the progressive poetics and aesthetics. So, but among the progressives also, you have very powerful voices, like for example of Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Faiz, you know, has become an institution. No poet has been read and worked upon and sung so much as Faiz has been celebrated. Some people say that Faiz has been over-celebrated, but that's a different question. So these were the two streams taking place at the same time. So I would say that while Miraji and Nur bin Rashid started the high modernist trends in Urdu poetry, these poets who were not with the Halqa or with the circle of, didn't belong to the circle of connoisseurs, they were writing poetry of social realism, they were writing poetry of great political awakening, and they were thinking of the birth of a new social system, of social justice and economy, and all these things were their direct concern. So this is definitely the time when modernism takes a leap, and then after that it goes into different directions.
Now, we know that socialist realism as a genre has been much talked about in Indian context with regard to progressive,
Exactly.
right? So, how much do you think this, because as far as I am aware, that it's an European genre, a genre which developed in Europe and specifically in Russia, Soviet at that point of time. So, how much did it influence the literary form of the progressives, one, and the second being, if you could elucidate on what exactly is socialist realism?
To put very simply, to understand society in the real context, the contemporary context, things as they are, and also behind that, things as they should be, because there is a dissatisfaction, and therefore there is a view and a vision that you have for the future. So things as they are, with which we are not happy, and things as they should be, that is, there is a dream, there is an aspiration. So the social realism is not something which you can isolate and say that it can be looked in separation from everything else in life and society. You have to take into account the political climate, you have to take into account the economic condition, the suffering of the people. You have to view life afresh. I'll give you an example. Progressive writers, when this meet, the Lucknow meet, 1936, when Premchand gives his presidential address, he speaks a very important sentence there. He says, "Ke hame husn ka meyar badalna hoga." You will have to change the standards of beauty. Now, this beauty is not different. I'm reminded of something very similar. It's very analogous in the sense that someone said in the English context that no longer can we write poetry of the rose and the Rolls Royce. We now have to write poetry of, and we now have to discover the horror and the boredom and the ugliness of life. So this horror, this boredom, this ugliness that is very close to social realism, you see what's happening. So the reality and as it is and what it should be like. I could illustrate this by saying that in India, of course, this was with the progressive writers, especially Urdu. It happened with the progressive writers only, that this idea of the social realism realism and social justice, and all these things came into being. See, for example, if you look at the poems, I will talk about poems because they're more metaphorical and constructed expression. So, for example, if you look at the poems by early Fairs, or even later, you can see a poem like Mujhse Pehle Se Mohabbat Dil Mein Ho, or a poem in the similar vein by Sardar Jafri, where he says, "Tu mujhe itne pyar se mat dekh. Don't look at me so fondly, because the world has changed, the situations are now different." You have poems by Janissar Akhtar, you have poems by Wamin Johanpuri, you have poems by Sardar Jafri, and several other poets who were writing at that point of time. Majaz, for example, and poems that were very clearly political, in the sense that there are poems on capitalism, Sarmayadari. There is a poem in which the poet looks at the beloved in a different way and says that this angel of yours could also be a parcham, could be a flag. So let the figure of the woman change. This angel may not be an angel of beauty, it can be a flag, it can announce a revolution. So things like this is realism, this is understanding times in the context, social, economic and political. So that was the time. Of course, you are right in saying that it was something very European. But I would say that one of the features and one of the important things about progressive writers movement that we should remember is this, that it brought to the fore what social realist fiction means and what social realist poetry means, and where lies the essence of life as it has to be understood today, how it has to be contextualized, how is the text being changed. For example, this is a new text, this is a new author. This author is no longer a romantic one, and this is no longer the poetry or the fiction that you can read at leisure and then you can fall asleep. This is not the kind. This challenges you. This interrogates. This puts a question. This is not something like a lyric. It's not romantic. It's very different. So realism from this point of view can be like this.
Now that you say this, that this is the time or the kind of poetry or let's say literature written that boils your blood, that gives you a call to change. Now, given the socio-political scenario of 1930s in India, the manifesto of the progressive writers claims that it is an anti-fascist organization because of the growth of fascism all over the world, as you Hitler and Mussolini, as you rightly put in the beginning of the interview. Now, how much was it justified, or how did the progressives justify themselves being an anti-fascist organization to operate from an anti-imperialist stand?
I think both things come together,
right?
Anti-imperialist and anti-fascist. To extend the same question and the same answer that you put earlier about social realism, I would say that there is a very interesting poem by Wamin Johanpuri, if I remember right, Bhoka Hai Bangal, Rasati Bhoka Hai.
In fact, IBPA had a program called Bhoka Hai Bangal.
Now, this is also another part of social realism. But as far as this also relates with the decolonization, this also relates with the new economic policy, because after the Great Depression, the economic policies that were changing, and especially the British economic policies in India that were changing, the victim was agriculture.
Right.
So the produce and the proceeds from there, both the produce and the proceeds, both were very, very severely impacted. As a result of which there was so much of suffering. So you can relate it both ways, as far as colonial policy is concerned, and also as far as the political and the economic policies are concerned, and all these things are taken together. So the rise of fascist forces, totalitarian forces, expansionist tendencies. So progressive writers movement is an answer to that. Tries to negotiate with that, and tries to speak by creating its own kinds of metaphor, by creating its own figures of resistance. Now this word resistance, for example, is something that we use now, and I understand it is the progressive who should be seen as writing the finest resistance literature ever. But I also at the same time think that there is much literature that has been written because it is written according to a manifesto. And literature cannot be written according to a manifesto.
Yes.
Manifestos are very topical and very time bound sometimes, as you can see. It reminds me of the Imagists.
Right.
So when T. Hume comes up with a list of the do's and the don'ts of poetry, well, it did succeed for a time, say for about a decade. But after that, they lost their vigor and their vitality, and that flame was lost. So everyone who had put in that anthology did write according to certain manifesto. This is the kind of image that we have to use. This is the kind of language, and this is how you have to project yourself. This is the poet, and this is the theme, the idea. But after a few years, everyone started writing his or her own kind of poetry. Similarly, here also you will find that they were writing according to certain ideology. So it was very ideology-based poetry or ideology-based story. But later, and that is why some of these stories and some of these poems became very topical, and also they didn't serve the purpose of that literature which stays beyond time, that is, which has a greater shelf life. But among the progressive, you have certain very important texts, and they are the texts which have a longer shelf life, historically as well as for their literary merit, historical importance as well as their literary merit. So this is the kind of a condition. So this progressive writers movement has to be contextualized in relation to the decolonization and the imperialist forces, that is to say, and then
The
the fascists. So a kind of a protest. So this is the highest kind of a resistance in the protest literature that was being produced. So it has to be taken on this.
Do you think that the publication and prescription of Angari in 1933 actually created a kind of base for, let's say, the popularity of progressives in one way, and even there were certain voices that were getting silenced with the ban of Angari in 1933? So, would you just talk about this controversy and the debate of Angari?
This Angare and one more book which I mentioned a while ago, that is other literature revolution. These are very vital texts, and also Roshni. Now these three texts, if you take together, they are very forward-looking texts, especially Angari. It was for the first time that the reader, the Urdu reader especially, got to know of a person called Freud, and got to know of a story writer like D.H. Lawrence. So suddenly the world of Urdu readers was exposed to or came to know about these two giant thinkers and psychologists and novelist writers. So this was very forward-looking from that point of view. As far as the themes are concerned, they were very bold. And naturally, when you do something for the first time, you shock, you give a shock, you surprise. People are not ready to take it as it is. But it takes some time to settle down and then to see things from some distance and from. So there has to be a clinical detachment. It was not possible at that point of time to think of sex and to think of certain very explicit situations that you don't experience, explicit experience of mind that they were talking about. So what they were doing is this, they were saying things for the first time and in a new style and in a new idiom, which was very shocking and surprising and therefore not accepted. This happens, this is not surprising. When modernism comes in poetry, this is also very shocking and surprising, but then you get used to it. So this is the change of the poetics, this is the change of the yardsticks. And once you get used to it, so for the first time when you do something that shocks and surprises, but then you start absorbing. So it's a shock that you get absorbed, that you start absorbing in a little while. That is what happened with Angari also. Now Angari has its historical importance, like several other texts in the Quran. So it has a very, very clear historical significance, and you can't deny it. And those few stories in Angari, Rashid Jahan, for example. Another important point is this, that a woman was also writing like this. And then you come across a writer like Ismail Chughtai, who came up with her own kind of a literature which was not easily acceptable, coming from a Muslim, coming from a woman, coming at a point of time when such kind of literature. Actually, they were not writing the kind of literature, story or poetry that they expected to gain popularity overnight. And I remember, I think it was Lawrence Durrell who said that, beware of the poetry that makes its place overnight. So this is not the poetry or the story that was making its place. It was making its place slowly and painfully. And Angari, and it's very significant historical and very of historical importance and very, very exciting. So that is why I said it's very forward-looking text, very forward-looking text in theme as well as in style. experience that they were trying to portray. The narration was very different. And that is why it's a very typically modernist attitude that they developed towards life and art, both life and art.
So, do you think that the progressives of, let's say, beginning from 30s in Urdu language, trying to write more, trying to, let's say, change the idioms of poetry more, or the prose or the narratives more, or they were balanced? Why I ask you this? Because as we are taking it for granted to certain extent that the progressives were ideologically inclined to Marxists. Now, whether they were propagating it or not in their writing, I think it changes from writer to writer. We cannot say that everyone was being propagandist from the very beginning. Many of them were not. And now, keeping that in mind, poetry in itself demands precision, and prose in itself demands a kind of elaboration, a kind of narrative, right? So do you think in order to politically place their ideology, or let's say if not politically also, whatever they believed in, it was the forms of poetry they were trying to change, or the forms of prose and narrative that they were trying to change?
Very rightly and very relevant question, I would say. I would say that we cannot very clearly separate poetry from prose or poetry from short story. Therefore, you have to take both together. You can't say that this poetry and poetry alone is important and stories are not. Similarly, stories alone are important. That is not taken. Right to say. Which means that you have to take a holistic, develop a holistic view. Having said that, I would say, and you are very right in saying that in prose you are more expository, you are explaining more, and there is a little place for metaphor maybe there. You work through your statements. But that also happened in poetry at that point of time among the progressives, that the loss of metaphor does take place in some poets. It recovers, and metaphors and symbols, they recover later. When the modernists come on the scene, for example, at the same point of time, Erim Rashid was writing, and even Faz, he was also creating metaphor. And for example, the red color, the blood. So I would say that in some of the poets, you see that it comes very close to a statement. And poetry is not a statement. Poetry works in a different manner. It works even through silence. So some of these poets were not as say effective as a modernist poet would rather be, because he works through the technique of indirection, through the technique of suggestion. But all poetry written at any point of time is not significant. Therefore, we cannot judge the progressive poets only because most of their poetry, or even a major part of their poetry, was a propaganda. That is why this charge comes, that there is a propagandist element. True, partially true. But we have to look at the entire context in which this poetry was written. And as I said, all poetry written at all point of time is not significant. So you will have to sift, you will have to see which is more important and which is to be taken aside and not to be taken into consideration. So time tells that story. Now I think this is the appropriate time to talk about the progressives again, because 30 is over, 40 is over, now we are in the new century. We are looking back and trying to assess. It takes time. There has to be some objective, say, some detachment has to be there. So we are detached from the kind of situation. We are living in a post-colonial condition, post-colonial India. So progressives are a chapter, a very significant chapter. 3-4 languages of India. And they made a dent, they made a mark. They brought us very close to modernism. Their poetry and prose have to be taken together. They have to be looked today from another perspective as well. That is, if you look at the aspect of art and aesthetics, and how does that work? So there is enough scope to work even today on how does the art and aesthetics that the progressive writers did find its place and how much did it suffer. So for example, there is an idea of how did, and if at all it does, how did metaphor suffer? How does the language or the idiom or the diction of the progressive writers is much close to a statement, the poetry or the literature of a statement. So these are the questions that one might address, and these are very relevant questions to address. But I understand that this was the time when language was trying to redefine itself. And so when you redefine something, you can't set a standards. the readers have to wait for some time for the voice to concretize and for the images to come with greater clarity and for the metaphors to mature. And then, so naturally this is a time in which experimentations were also being made, new ideas and new themes and new say techniques of writing were coming in. So I think this idea that poetry and prose may be taken separately may not be very right, they have to be taken together. And also that sometimes in poetry there is the statement, the language of prose comes very handy. But at the same time, you have certain stories where that idea of suggestiveness, that idea of illusion, for example, in the stories of Angare itself, the kind of literature that was being created by Ahmad Ali, for example. So you have that kind of a thing. In certain poets of, say, for example, Kafi Azmi, and if you try and compare and contrast it with the poetry of Faz, for example, or Makhdoom Muhyiddin, for example, he was a very clearly an activist, and several of them were activists. So you will find that in some poets a statement proceeds, takes over.
Right.
And in some poets it's not a statement, it's very well negotiated, very well formulated, very well negotiated. And that is why Faz succeeds better than others, because he can create that metaphor, he can create that symbol, he can write in a language, so he evolves his diction. He had the other advantage of his training, of his knowledge, of his awareness of Urdu, Persian, English, Arabic. So he drew from many sources, and that is how he could. And he taught literature also. But he was an activist, and he was an editor, and he was arrested. So he had broader exposure to life, and to literature, to arts and aesthetics and everything. And he had travelled much. He had passed through all kinds of situations, political evils that he had experienced himself. He was arrested. So he lived a very full life, and he created a kind of literature out of all this. So this served as his hinterland experience from which he comes in, from that vantage point he speaks. So in him you will find that there is a greater appeal in his poetry. But what makes Faz more appealing is the kind of rhythm that he developed in his poetry. Probably no other progressive poet at that point of time did develop this kind of rhythm. So there is a certain amount of musicality, and that is why you see that he has been sung the best.
Now that you say, the immediate example that comes to my mind is Hum Dekhenge. Right.
So Tarana is there, Dua is there,
Dua
wonderful poems are there. Mujhse Pehli Se, as I said, Bol is a very powerful poem. Bol ke lab azad hai tere. So several, Dhaka se Vapsi, Subhe Azadi, you name it.
So these all had political inclinations, statements in it, but still it stood out as poetry.
As poetry, because Faz was negotiated better than, I would understand, better than some other. Of course, I understand Majaz was a very important poet. Janisar Akhtar was a very important poet. There were several others, some poems of Wamin Jaunpur, I understand, very, very important. Especially this poem, which reads like a slogan, but it has great contemporary relevance, which I refer to, the Bengal for me. So there were several others, but definitely Faz stands out. Well, there is another opinion about Faz. See, there is a trial at the same time. Faz, Rashid, and Miraji. These poets were writing together, contemporaries, but they write three different kinds of poetry. All of them, three different kinds of poetry. And there are critics and there are readers, sensitive ones, who say that these two poets, Miraji and Rashid, leave Faz far behind.
Okay.
And that has been given cognizance. I personally believe that Miraji and Rashid are very significant poets. Faz has his own world, very excels very well. But Miraji and Rashid are poets of greater worth, I understand. The hinterland of that experience is much wider. The kind of, apart from what they have to say, the way they put it, the rhythm that they create in their poetry is very different from the rhythm that Faz. Faz's rhythm is very appealing. It pleases you. It brings you close to music. You lend your ears to it. Miraji does it in a different manner. He rather challenges you when you put it. For example, there is a very interesting poem in Miraji called Jatri. It's a long prose poem. Runs into, you just read a page and a half. It doesn't stop anywhere. Ek aaya gaya, dusra aayega jayega. You keep on reading that. Great experimentary poem. And the kind of, because Miraji also had that kind of a background. He was very well read in Sanskrit and French. and he had drawn on several kinds of sources, and he was a Bohemian. We all know about that. The very name that he acquired, that it's very interesting story. It has been said that he acquired his name was Sanaullada, but because he loved someone, a Bengali girl called Meera Singh, so he adopted this name and called himself Meera. It is the story.
Yes.
It's true, but then, and he's very idiosyncratic character. So about Faiz, there are notions, and there are people who say that Faiz, of course, was a very significant poet, but not at the cost of the two others who were writing. In fact, it's as opposed to that, Miraji and Rashid were probably poets of, I would say greater, but definitely much more significant poets who are compared with the others. So they had a different aesthetics, altogether different aesthetics. It was a small group. Circle of Connoisseurs was a small group. In Progressives, there were larger number of people. And Progressive didn't stop at one particular place, they went on. And they even write today. In 2015, you have Progressive writers writing of hunger and economic depression and saying political exploitation, all that. That's all Progressive writing. But of course, when you say Progressive writers, you mean 1930s onwards. That is the time scale.
So, how much do you think a cultural organization of a leftist party, which had just entered, let's say, Indian politics in early 1920s, how much do you think that this political line actually creeped into the, or at all did it creep into the organization's functionings, or let's say, did it anyway dictate its line with regard to the aesthetics of the progressive right?
I would say that we cannot really separate the political from the literary area. This is a different age. The manifesto of the progressive writers movement, if you look at it, at point-wise they say these are the things that we need to do. They also emphasize upon coming together, integration, we have to integrate. They also speak about language, that we have to develop a language that is Hindustani. We have to develop a dialogue, and these are the issues that we have to write about. So this is a formula given to them, and that is how they have to write. But at the same time, artful. Poetry that was written according to a formula that doesn't succeed. So naturally you have to renegotiate from your own angle. So there is a difference among the progressives. So Majroor was writing one kind of poetry, Jalisar was writing entirely different kind of poetry. So I would say that the two cannot be separated. The political agenda and the literary agenda. There has to be a negotiation. IPTA is a very good example. It's a very good example. So there is an ideology. But beyond only on ideology, you can produce maybe a weak play. Unless you negotiate it artistically. Unless you know dramaturgy. Unless you know the art of delivery and art of presentation and the stage and the audience. So unless you know that, you just can't. I've seen there are closed plays which don't really function, which don't really matter at all. Even if you put them on the stage, they don't really work. It's a different matter that Waiting for Godot did work. It was a different kind of a play altogether, very revolutionary. But I think in the case of this kind of literature, this message or this political agenda and the artistic agenda, the agenda of the artist, the writer, the call of the word, the call of the art, there has to be a negotiation. And without only those poets and writers did succeed who could negotiate with the artistic and the political.
And I think also this was the first time in India when the artists or the writers were having a voice of their own to make a statement politically and trying to change it socially even.
Yes, Makhdoom Mehuddin is the best example.
Right.
He was clearly well-known in the Feminist Party. In his own region, he was a very active worker and very powerful poetry at the same time that he wrote. Makhdoom Mehuddin. Another example from this side is Sardar Jafri. Now, it's a different matter. You may agree with the worth of poetry, you may not agree. There are certain points which don't make much impact. But I would say at the same time that if you compare these two poets, probably you will find Makhdoom Mehuddin closer to it. Because he speaks that language of revolution in a way that even if you are not a revolutionary, you come very close to listening to that kind of voice. But in the hands of Sardar Jafri, for example, or in the hands of Kafi Army, for example, maybe you don't have that the similar kind of poetry. It's a different poetry where statements seem to be taken quite frequently. But then the message is important, negotiation is important. So as I said, all these writers were trying to negotiate in their own way and succeeding or failing in their own way as well. So not that all poetry that was written at that point in time was major.
Major, right.
Some was very important. And it's always that some are important. In every age, some are important. If you look at the history of literature, any literature, you will find that an age is known by a few authors. And you have 600, 700, 800 years of history. So any take for example English or Hindi or Bangla. So in centuries you have 10 authors, 20 authors, 15 authors. These are the canonical authors. So similar is the case with the progressive. So some canonical authors are there. But the significant thing is that there is a movement. And this movement is significant. So this is a movement, as I said, that I don't think and I can't think of any movement in literature that has been so significant as far as their response to the politics and the economy of the times is concerned. And that is why this is so significant.
How much do you think progressive managed to change the, or let's say, leave an impact on the language-based literatures that we're looking at? Because you already said that there were 4 major centers. One Urdu, the Hindi, Bangla and Malayalam. So how much do you think they were certainly able to break away from the romanticism, from the stalemates of the literary scenario of that time? But with respect to language, what were the changes that one can look at?
The change is very clear. If you for this, you will have to put it in a historical perspective once again. Say, for example, take the language of the poetry that was the language that was used by Hali, the language that was used by Muhammad, and then you go and say Ismail Meriti, for example. So there is a variety there. Then you come down to Iqbal, high flown, Persianized, Arabized, philosophical, Islamic history, lots of things, very heavy, very significant. A certain kind of a language. Of course, Iqbal is an exception, very different. So this language harks back to the constructions of the past, more Persianized. Hali gave a call for new poetry because they said that so far the poetry had excelled in Ghazal. Now we have to get out of it because Ghazal is only talking about love and the lady love and the suffering and the pains and etc. So we need to come out of it. Of course, the call was not very well heeded to in the beginning, but later it was realized it's important. This call did really materialize with the progressives. So the language that was handed over to them by Hali and by Azad and of those who came together, say in Lahore under that banner which is known as Anjuman-e-Punjab Lahore, and then when you come out of there, you will see that the language is rather one-to-one correspondence kind of a language. It gets a little more forward-looking, a little more advanced when you reach the progressive. Progressives wrote in a language which was the common day-to-day idiom of the time. You could communicate more directly with the reader, and that was the intention essentially. Whereas the intention, the reader that the earlier poets had defined, was a reader who was well-read, who was well educated in language, who could understand the nuances. Here the poet was addressing a larger mass of people. Say for example, a very significant poem that Sahib Ludhiana wrote at that point of time called Taj Mahal. Very well known poem. And I have heard that when he read this poem in a mushara in Calcutta, everyone was mesmerized. The way it was presented, and more than that, for the idea, for the ideology, and for the experience that he was trying to put forward. Now imagine, where was he reading this poem in Bengal? Who was the audience? Of course, those who understood this language, and also those who didn't understand this language. That command and reach as one who knows the Urdu language. Say for example, the Bengali listening to the poetry of Calcutta, he too was mesmerized, just as anyone else was mesmerized. Meri Mehboob kahin aur mila karo. This kind of poetry. So what I would say that this is the situation that was developing at the time. So the language was the language of the common day-to-day conversation, and this language had evolved out of the needs of the time. So it was need-oriented language. Language was being redefined by the progressives, and it was moving away from the old school. And it made way, as I said in the beginning, made way for the coming of the next generation poets, the modernists and the high modernists who came after that, because Miraji and Rashid were forward-looking poets. They wrote much in advance, I think. Poets like them wrote much later, so they were the people, the torchbearers who wrote the finest kind of poetry at that point of time, and very romanticized and very, very progressive. So poetry was made. So the language, the experiment with language was definitely made, and the idea was to develop a dialogue. That is the main reason, and that is the main part. Develop it. So that element of dialogue, the development of a dialogue. So poetry was as if dialogic in nature. And that is what brings it very close to short story. That is, the short story was also very dialogic. It was creating, developing a dialogue with the reader. The poetry too was created. So when you read that poem, when Sahir read that poem, it immediately he could connect with the people because of the dialogue that he was trying to develop. He was speaking not to the beloved, he was speaking to the people who were listening. So this is an important aspect which needs to be taken into consideration.
With regard to PWA, what exactly happened after India gained independence and the partition of India?
Say 1947, 48, 50, after that 60s. 60s onwards, you have a very clear change. Modernist poetry in Urdu, trying to seek its place. That was the time of great experimentation, both in language and form. So you have a huge number of poets writing simultaneously, and they were all making experiments with the language and form. Progressive were losing fire, very naturally. No movement or no milieu, for example, which is different from movement. So loses fire after some time because new voices emerge, new techniques emerge. And that is why I said it's the bridge. So after 60s, you have a new direction that Urdu poetry more importantly, and I understand the same is the case with Hindi. That after 60s, you have a different condition. Language is again being, as I said, defined. The experience is being looked. It's a typical post-colonial condition that one was living in. The agenda of the progressives was not the agenda of these poets who wrote after 60s or during 60s or even after. They were more concerned with the immediate in a different manner. The challenges were over. This was the time to realize the Nehruvian dream. Ideologies were changing, India had become independent. So these kinds of situations were happening. The social, cultural, political domains were under great transformation. So it would be futile to expect that the same fire would continue for some more time beyond 60s, 70s, 80s. No, that is not the case. Because then you have lots of poets who came and made great experiments, spoken in tone and developed a voice. You have a poet like Muhammad Ali, who is not a progressive, and he speaks to you and sits as if he's here sitting next to you. You are shaking hands, embracing him. Wonderful poet. You have a poet like Adil Mansoori. Sometimes you think there's upset. So the upset was also very real. So things of this kind were happening. You come down later in the 90s and then 2000 and now. Again, it seems that new myths are being created. These are not the myths of only a post-colonial society. These are the myths of the new life that you are living within your own conditions. You hardly bother about the post-colonial. You are conditioned and you are attuned to your own condition, which you might in academic say. But then these poets are not that way concerned. They are concerned. So their ears and their eyes are open now to much more, to greater vistas. The impact comes to them. Of course, it did come to them from the foreign sources, from the English, more importantly, and the French. But the modernist writers, those who came after 60s, 70s, 80s, they are much prone to the English, the American, and the European voices. So many of the experiments that they make in their poetry are also drawn from. Just like in the case of the Indian poets writing in English, till Sarojini Derozio, Sarojini, that's one kind of poetry. Then you have a sudden leap. You come to the poetry of Ramanujan, Ezekiel, Ramanadas, Daruvala. What I say often is this, that these poets have no models for them to develop upon. Whereas Sarojini had, Taurudat had, Arudat had, Michael Madhusudan had, they had some model of the romantics to develop upon. Now the poets coming after 1947, after 1950, they have no models, they developed. But so who were their models? Their models were T.S. Eliot and W. Jordan and company. 30s, again 30s. That is such a significant time. Similar is the case in Urdu and in Hindi Bangla also. So the echoes of the 30s, the writers of the 30s in England and America were impacting the poets and the writers in our languages as well. But they are much more clearly audible, and you can very clearly recognize that signature after 60s. That if during the 60s the impact, so for example, William Carlos Williams did impact poetry in New Zealand. Frost did impact. T.S. Eliot very important. W. Jordan. So this influence was very, very interesting influence to trace.
So, do you think that, say after 47, when Sajjad Zahir becomes the first president of Communist Party of Pakistan, and Urdu becomes a language which is spoken in my neighboring country, not anymore my country, it becomes a language of the minority in my country, not a majority. How literature shaped immediately after independence, because often when I have spoken to the practitioners who were there in, let's say, People's Theatre movement, they said that Azadi ke baad kuch nahi tha. After independence, we really did not have anything to fight for. Do you think it was a similar call in the Progressive Writers Association also? As far as I realize, this was not the independence they were looking forward to.
Which Faiz very clearly said.
Yes.
In Subh Azadi he says
Subh
this.
Azadi, yes.
Yes, to a great extent you are right that there was an agenda and the agenda was over. And still the agenda was not over. Because getting freedom was not the only aim. That was not the only objective. There was much more than that. So equity, justice, even today you think of these things. We talk of the subaltern today, we talk of the Dalit today, these are the agendas. We talk of the gender issues today. Every age brings forth, projects its own conditions, projects its own parameters by which you write, by which you are understood, by which you are debated. So, historically speaking, and as far as the literary chronology and the historical chronology goes, progressives had a call, they listened to that call and responded to it. But with the passage of time, of course, 1947 is a very significant time. So after that, the historical and the political situation changed. So the poetry and the literature too had to change and to harm these times. It couldn't have been written in the same manner always. That's not possible. So there comes a time in Urdu literature, more importantly, that there's a new nation. Pakistan is coming to be. Urdu is a major language there. I won't say the national language because we say that we are a multilingual nation, India, with 22 languages accepted by the constitution. But in Pakistan also there is a multilingual condition. You have Urdu, you have Sindhi, you have Saraiki, you have Punjabi, and all of these languages. So the literary scenario in Pakistan changes because there is an intermixing of different languages there. But at the same time, I would not say that Urdu literature should be viewed as Pakistani literature and Urdu literature in India. Urdu literature remains the same. So far, even Urdu critics haven't said that this is Pakistani Urdu literature separate from it. So that division hasn't taken place there. Still it goes. We know it as Urdu literature. The difference is this, that the political situation has demanded a different kind of a text there. 70s is a very powerful time, very significant time in Pakistan. General Ziaul Haq, martial law administrator. The plight of women, the bands and the movement of the women and their expressions banned on the television and putting the ordinance and lots of things to happen. So there comes before you a kind of poetry which was never heard of. Poets like Femi Dariyas, Vishwan Naik, and then a whole lot of poets later. Clearly activist poets, but also at the same time, this is another very important analogy in the lesson of history, but also at the same time, very powerful poetry, I would say. I would not say they were just feminist poets, they were more than that. They were politically very conscious, they were on the road, they were agitated, they were being arrested, they were being harassed. So all these kinds of things. Now this is the Pakistani experience. We had a different kind of experience. Our historical situation was a different situation post 1947. So we had our own dilemmas just as they had their own dilemmas. But the literature does hark back to this. So in spite of this difference in the historical condition, after 1947, literature responds in both the countries in its own way, but you will see that there is a great similarity between the way the language and the technique is being employed there and the language and the technique that we are employing here in India. To write a ghazal, for example, to write a nazm, for example, these are the two ways in which you express yourself in poetry. So that is a very significant aspect in Pakistan as in India, because after 1947, though the partition takes place, but literatures aren't partitioned. They aren't partitioned. They still, of course, the experiential variety is there. So we have a different kind of an experiential variety there. But in between, you have again the echoes of the progressives there as well as here. Very, very modernist poets, looking forward to a time which hasn't yet come, but they can probably foretell. The poet sees much in advance. This was, I think, who said this? Ezra Pound. That they are the antenna of their generation. We don't have antennas any longer. No one, the children today don't know what is an antenna. But we have seen antenna at the rooftops. So they were the antenna of their generation. So these antennas have responded, and they have shown the pictures on their screen very clearly. These are naked pictures of the society, of the men and the women, the political conditions that this affect. So this reflection is very clearly there. So that agenda remains and it keeps on peeping. The agenda might differ, the agenda it does differ.
So do you think it still peeps in 2015?
It does. It does, because there is no literature that doesn't hark back and doesn't stay in time and doesn't look beyond. So it does speak the past, the present, and the future. Today's poetry does respond to history. You are writing from the present vantage point, but you are also futuristic. My opinion is that today's Urdu literary writing is very futuristic. It looks beyond the time given, and it looks beyond the techniques that you are employing today. It's very experimental, hugely experimental. It has come very close. One of the most remarkable things in poetry is that it has come very close to prose rhythm. And yet it is not prose. It is very close to prose rhythm, and yet not prose. And it's as charged as poetry should be, as highly metaphoric as poetry or symbolic as poetry should be. So, put it differently, you can say the word, the way you use the word. So the word becomes an image, the image becomes a symbol, the symbol a metaphor, the metaphor a symbol, the symbol a myth. So this is the kind of a journey that you have seen. And these journeys are punctuated by the ages that we live in. So progressive did punctuate it at one place of time. The metaphor might have suffered, but the succeeding generation took it upon themselves to revive the metaphor. Now we are creating new myths of our life. We are in a stage in 2015 when new myths of our lives are being created by our poets and artists. It may be in the theatre, it may be in the fiction, it may be in the new thing that has happened is the popular literature, which we used to be set aside and not taken seriously. Now this is the new literary condition. So even the popular is something that you have to pay heed to. In the Western world, people didn't read Gone with the Wind with great interest and critical curiosity. And it is a part of the text that you read with greater sincerity. The detective fiction was not read with the same honesty and with the same critical attention. So the situation has changed. New kinds of literary texts are being created. The reader is new, the author is new, the conditions in which he's writing are very new today. It's very futuristic writing that we have in Urdu right now. Very futuristic.
So who do you think, this is a very biased question to ask, but who do you think would stand out even today as one of the greatest, or say you can name many, as the greatest writers of the progressive movement, whom a student of literature today should look back to in order to get the taste of what they are reading now?
I would say if you look at poets, it would be Faz, for the reasons which I think I have enumerated at some length. You would have Janisar Ahmed. You would have Asrarul Haq Majaz, another important poet. You would have Sardar Jafri, you would have Majroor Sultan. So about a dozen poets will stand out. And a student of literature, literature today will have to, if he has to take a stock of the worth of progressive poetry and progressive writing, will have to hark back to these poets, because these were the poets who were making the impact. And they are still honored and heard when they are sung, they are still written with critical steel. Faz is a very unique example. Some people say that he has been overrated, but that's a different kind of readings may differ, there is no doubt about it. But the fact of the situation remains, fact of the matter remains that Faz is a very popular poet, because he appeals to the common reader, the listener. You remember his poetry more than you remember anyone else's poetry. His lines are very aphoristic, and he was very pragmatic in his attitude towards life. And his poetry does come close to slogan, but immediately it recovers and rises and goes above slogan. So say for example, Dole looks like a very statemental poem, but it's not a statement. Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zaban teri. It looks like simple prose saying someone will do this, and you can do this, and you can speak now. But it's not that, it's beyond that. Similarly, come and raise your hands for prayer. Or Tarana, for example, postmanों के नाम, and देखानों के नाम, and रिक्शावालों के नाम, नागेवालों के नाम, very powerful poetry. And you can see that dramatizes. He creates a stage. There are characters. There is a dialogue, and there is a condition that he weaves to. There is a story that he is telling. So it's that is why he stands out. Sardar Jafri, Jansar Afdar, Asrarul Majaz, these are the poets of Majroor Sultan. These are the poets who stand out. One thing which I would add is this, that not in the form of Nazm, mostly in the form of Nazm. Nazm is a regular poem in which you write of any length, 4 lines to 400 lines or whatever, and there are many genres, Masnavi and Qasida and Munajat and this and that. So in the form of Nazm, the regular poem, so to say, if you were to put it like this, they have succeeded very well there. Some of these poets did write ghazals also, and with the ghazals also the same themes that the progressives held very close to their heart. They are very much clearly expressed. But ghazal, as you know, remains a different art form in which you speak to the beloved, so that element is on. Now the figure of the beloved is also changed.
Yes.
The beloved is no longer that romantic.
So the form gets revolutionized.
The form gets revolutionized, the figures get revolutionized, the human figures get revolutionized. So this is what is happening.